I'll be speaking in English simply because the subject matter, basically, this is an ode of adoration for a man who was my mentor and friend and teacher for a long time. It's going to sound like he's dead already, but he's not. Actually, he's sitting somewhere in the crowd. But it's normally things reserved for the dead, what I'm going to say today. About 6 or 7 years ago, I had a one-year break from teaching, and I wrote a few things, and I wanted to write some more literary essays in Spanish. And I wrote a few focused on moral portrayals of particular individuals who struck me for some reason or another. So I had one called the Incontinent Mr. Macias. Incontinent in Spanish means out of control, and it was about a friend of mine whose sexuality, his writing, his vigor's out of control. I wrote one on the dramatic Dr. Peter Gao. I wrote one, and I wrote one on the liminal Dr. Juan Echeverri, right? And that was about this fellow anthropologist, Colombian, who will have been my mentor for a while. Then I had it was in Spanish, never did anything much with it, but then in Salsa in Santa Fe a couple of years ago, I heard Beth Conklin speak about the mutual disappointment between indigenous Amazonians and white outsiders who spent some time among them, mainly government officials, NGO philanthropists who come to help the Indians. Soon enough, I mean, these outsiders, these would-be philanthropists, grow tired of the incessant demands for goods of their Indians, and the Indians grow disappointed and disinterested in a relationship in which these outsiders have grown stingy. Right? So I was thinking a lot about that in 2008 when I went to the field with Juan Echeverri. This is a film from that visit, and I was struck by Juan's very successful exchanges with Amazonian Indians. And I mean, I've been going to the field with Juan since 1993, and always noticed how effective he was at interacting with the people. He kept writing in his little green notebook in the back what people were asking for, and he would provide, in his following visit, anything from impellers for a Yamaha motor to arnica gel for pain massages to booklets for little kids to read. In turn, he would get gifts, densely packed tins of coca, tobacco paste, and so forth. Like I said, the relationship was a successful one, and long-term. I mean, he's been doing fieldwork since 1979 in that region. So the question is, how does he manage it, or there's a why in there. Why is this relationship successful where so many fail? A simple answer will be, Juan kept coming up with the goods. I mean, you see him coming with, at a considerable personal expense, bringing lots and lots of gifts. But I think a more textured answer would address the fact that these exchanges, which are exchanges of gifts, but also of key ritual substances, tobacco, coca, tobacco in paste form, and vegetable salts to be consumed with the tobacco, mixed with the tobacco. These exchanges indexed, both for Juan and for the people he was with, relationships between well-constituted, generous, consistent persons. So that concept of indexing, by the way, you might recognize Red Keen there. Talk about substances and dealings with substances, I have to explain that a bit, are a matter of much moral solicitude in the Medio Caquetá region, with Huitoto and Huinane people with whom both Juan and I work. Basically, and I'm going to be going very quickly over this material, human beings, the bodies of human beings are fabricated by their kin out of tobacco paste, coca, hot chilies. These substances constitute the body, but they also generate moral subjectivities, moral thoughts, moral emotions, a capacity for discernment. That's an important aspect of knowledge, that discernment, which basically is, in their terms, it's a synonym of remembrance, memory. You remember the difference between improper and proper behaviors. So it is not surprising that everything to do with substance is the matter of moral evaluations, moral talk. Substance production, for instance, is conceived as a transformation of useless, evil, nasty things into good things, good substances, sweet, tasty, nourishing substances, into capacities for actions, agency. They make people moral. Producing substances also requires a great deal of knowledge, in the sense of memory of how one ought to be, how one ought to behave, and a great deal of work. Furthermore, not just production, but distribution, exchange, consumption, how you do these things with tobacco-based salt, coke, etc., are something people are always attending to and evaluating others and producing moral portrayals of themselves concerning these abilities. So giving a man a flask of tobacco paste, as you do, when you meet another man, you exchange tobacco flasks briefly, you lick out of each other's tobacco. This gesture may be, it isn't always, sometimes it's just casual need for a little fix, but very often, sometimes, giving another man your flask of tobacco can be a claim to knowledge, a claim to morality, a claim to productive capacity, and in a way, a promise of future exchanges, a promise of continuity in the relationship. Right? Because if I'm giving you tobacco, it's because I produced it. I worked hard. I'm proving thereby that I'm a real man, knowledgeable because I got tobacco, which is hard to make and requires knowledge to make. It's a big claim, and I won't tell you about an infelicitous occasion in which I offered a man my own tobacco. So I think Juan's exchanges of tobacco, not just gifts, but also of tobacco with people of the center, indexed such a potential for continuity in the relationship, more than, say, when I exchange tobacco paste with them. So let me go tell you a bit about Juan. I met him in 1993 in the Medio Caquetá. I was doing my undergraduate fieldwork for an undergraduate thesis. We write quite a hefty undergraduate thesis in Colombia. And I soon realized that this guy knew the field site beautifully. He spoke with Toto well, he was getting to learn Winani, he knew the area geographically. He obviously knew well how to interact with locals. In short, he had a thick grasp of the people of the center. So I promptly got rid of my other supervisor and asked him to be my supervisor. They agreed because he'd gone to they knew him in my university, Universidad de Antioquia, because he'd been their stellar graduate many years before. And, well, he was an amazing supervisor. I don't have much time to go into the details of quite those early years, but I do want to tell you a bit about sort of why he interested me in that moral portrayal. Two reasons, two moral characteristics came up. One is vigor, extreme vigor with which to engage with anything, basically. So he was a very engaged Amazonianist and therefore an extremely knowledgeable one. He not only spoke with Toto very well, but he was quite willing to go and read books about botany in depth, about the chemistry of how tobacco affects you neurophysiologically, the chemical composition of the salt that comes out of a million different species out of which you can make salt. He had that vigor to engage with that. And further, I mean, you could talk about, he had read pretty much everything in the field that I knew of in ethnography. So, indefatigable in his willingness to take on knowledge about Amazonia and other stuff. I think he must have clocked about 5 or 6 years of fieldwork since 1979. A second aspect of Juan that I find pertinent here, which is a bit embarrassing to speak of in his presence, is what I call his liminality, and I'm using Victor Turner's term there. And the best way I can account for that is an example of how in 2002 he told me about how he came to recover his deep religiosity, his deep Christianity. It turns out he had started to study engineering first before studying anthropology. And he was very good at math, but hated engineering, would smoke these gigantic joints in the halls of the university. Soon giving up on that, he started finding it boring and took on mushrooms. And was very superstitious about taking the mushrooms. And then one day, one of his experiences involved a powerful wind that was going to blow him over a cliff. And he latched onto this cross of light, and it was that which saved him from falling over. He never again took mushrooms, but he did become, he again became the contrary of what he had been. He had been very anti-clerical even, and he became quite religious. But I find his investment in this world of spirits and so forth, in the Christian pantheon, let's say, extends as well to Amazonia. He, in my experience, was a deep believer in Amazonian accounts of personhood, of substances, and of morality. And it was a kind of investment that persuaded me very deeply. I am a non-believer, let's say, and often troubled by relationships with anthropologists who do believe in spirits and gods and so forth. I kind of want to tackle that theoretically at some point. Anyway, if somebody had come up to me and told me how he had discovered Christ in a high, I would normally have assumed that this person and I were defined ourselves in such a quintessentially different way that I wouldn't have much to talk with this person, right? Except maybe as an object of study. It would be somebody too different from me. The problem was I already knew Juan intimately and well, deeply admired his capacity, his anthropology. There was nothing to do with it. I had to take it. He's a believer and a brilliant anthropologist. By the way, I should quickly note, when you read Echeverri's written work, that spiritual side is not there. I don't know how he does that. But he's a PhD from the New School for Social Research. His PhD thesis was lauded for his work there. And you can read a very New York kind of scholarship in his work. If any of you have ever read Rubenstein, for instance, Steve Rubenstein, I find lots of convergence. There's something very New York about you. Little tidbits of Tausig and Talal Assad and people like Debbie Poole. You can read them in his work. People of the center also respect his deep knowledge of their world, both of their esoteric knowledge of myths, rituals, dances, and so forth, because he can sing and dance in the rituals, but also something that is perhaps rarer among some anthropologists, which is a deep grasp of the affordances of their physical world as dependent on their technology. Right? So he can talk to fishermen with hands-on knowledge of why nylon X is better than polyester Y for the purposes of weaving this or that net. You really have to know that world and to have fished in a way to know this. If you've ever read Jacob Melier on what goes into boat making in Norway, you'll understand what I'm talking about here. So locals were often in a position to recognize that Juan engaged with the prescriptions to produce substances and maintain relationships on the basis of these substances. Juan makes his own salt, for instance. Part of the video here is of us making salt in the household of an Okaina elder called General, Hipólito Candre General. If I have a couple of minutes in the end, I'll show you how salt is made. So I have been in circumstances where Juan actually bails out an elder, a maloca, sort of a ritual householder, who says, man, I am screwed, I do not have salt. Salt is quite hard to come by itself. Tough to produce, it takes an effort. And I saw Juan actually give, I've never seen another white man in a position to do that. Like, giving vegetable salts he himself had produced to an elder, so an elder could mix with tobacco and hold a gigantic dance ritual. So you start to see why his relationship with them is mighty a bit different than, say, mine. I have a good relationship with them too, but maybe for different reasons. Like I said, Juan has learned to use people of the center's imagery of substances and so forth, and selfhood, to define himself, to define his relationships, to define his world. Now, not all relationships that he had in the Amazon were perfect. I emailed him a copy of what I intended to say, and he chastised me because I was making it sound too good. And he highlighted some of his bad relationships. When he first arrived, for instance, the local political organization accused him of being an exploiter of indigenous people and made trouble for him. Even his main informant in the beginning did not have that great a relationship with him. But he kind of came out with an answer that was very Amazonian. Much like nasty things are transformed into good things when you make salt, his bad relationships were transformed through hard work, effort, knowledge, into proper human, lubricated relationships. Now, my point is not that one must go native like Juan, to the extent that Juan has or some other people have. In his case, it helped. Good relationships with Amazonian. Let me say what the difference between Juan and maybe NGO reps might be. He could interpret what people of the center said and did with great knowledge of their world, great knowledge of their historical relations, great knowledge of what constituted the proper footings of relation. How do you interact properly with people? How do you do that? Great knowledge of what features of persons they esteemed and which features they despised. Now in that, he's similar to other anthropologists with successful relations. Many of us, I know, have that kind of knowledge, and therefore we're capable of maintaining good relationships over some time. Juan adds a less common commitment, and which is that investment in substances that might further suggest to locals the probability of continuity. This is a man who consumes tobacco and coca in Bogota. His apartment in Bogota, it's not up here, but his apartment in Bogota, he keeps coca and tobacco and salt there. And he's, again, bailed out the occasional Huitoto or Munane who's just bereft of coca in Bogota and desperate for a little bit of stuff. I'm sure a few hundred of them have popped into Juan's apartment to beg for a little lick of tobacco and a couple of spoonfuls of coca. Let me, how am I doing with time?
Doing well, about 10 minutes.
Excellent. I'll show you 5 minutes of the salt making process.
Cantando, echando vainas de qué o qué?
A Chucho,
A Chucho. ¿De qué?
diciendo que aquí vengo, que estoy muy avergonzado. Como yo no soy capitán, como yo no traigo nada, entonces tengo mucha vergüenza. Los que trajeron así las miles, pues están sentados allá. Yo como no hay nadie, la próxima vez que haga baile ni me diga.
Ah, vuelve lo mencionaste, sí.
No, la gente se rió. Y Chucho celebraba eso.
Pero ese no es de vainas.
Pues sí, porque es diciendo como que Ustedes ya solo le paran bolas a los que traen así, los que traen, llegan con... Ya, ese no es... Ya, entonces ya listo, entonces quiere que tienen que... Bueno, pucha, ya yo recibí envío, me toca hacer alguna cosa. Me quedé más achantado, pues tampoco puedo quedarme así sentado. Me toca ahora... Y ese Eduardo, qué pereza. Entonces, pues yo, bueno, los de la oficina están más fáciles, ya me lo sé. Y tengo que pagar ese envío de alguna manera. Me paré, cogí la taza y comencé. Y las viejitas me acompañaron, una viejita me acompañó, ¿quién fue? Muy bacana. Claro,
Espontáneamente.
Sí, bueno, uno solo tiene que haber una acompañante, una viejita. Ahorita le prohíben.
Eso se parece a...
Mire cómo se infla, hermano.
Mm.
Eso sí vale la pena una película. Mire, eso es puro aire. Eso es gas carbónico, ¿puedes creer? Lo que lo hace inflar.
¿Cómo funciona?
Se produce, el químico me explicó, se produce gas carbónico, entonces todo esto después, eso se va a desinflar. Es puro gas que está metido, mire que tóquelo.
Y se libera por... Claro.
Luego se libera por los poros, digamos aquí, y mientras más sal le meta, uno le mete sal, mire que ni me toca, era un pegote. Uno le echa sal hasta que ya no sea pegotudo. Cuando está así, dice que ahí está pidiendo todavía. Dice, está pidiendo. Pero yo lo voy a dejar bravo, un poquito bravo, porque después se pone muy dulce. Lo que yo mezclo el estilo de ligar para dulce. Los muri no, poquitica sal o cero sal, a mí me impresiona. Estamos preparando nuestro viaje, vamos para Herrera, vamos para la casa de Hipólito. Con este pensamiento estamos viajando, este es nuestro pensamiento de amistad, pensamiento de buen trabajo. Con este pensamiento vamos, con este pensamiento regresamos aquí, con este pensamiento vamos a llegar a Leticia, vamos a llegar a un don Hipólito. Este espíritu va adelante, va como un perro para avisar. Cualquier obstáculo la aparta, cualquier persona dañina la aparta, cualquier pensamiento dañino la aparta. Nos avisan. No hay obstáculo, llegamos directo a Charrera, dulce su palabra, palabra de amistad, palabra de buena conversación, palabra dulce, palabra fresca, palabra de papá, palabra de mamá, palabra de amigo, palabra con que los niños duermen tranquilos, palabra de vida, palabra de tabaco, palabra de coca, con esta palabra hablamos. Fortaleza de nuestro cuerpo, da fuerza a nuestro cuerpo, da ánimo al corazón, bendición y luz al espíritu. Con este se abre el camino, con este se despeja el camino. Nadie estorba, nadie se atraviesa. Todos desvían la mirada. Nadie tiene duda, nadie tiene sospecha, nadie tiene nada que decirnos. Con esta palabra hablamos y atrae la buena conversación, atrae la amistad. Con esta palabra estamos llegando a la casa de Inaluz, a la casa de Luis Laforo. Llegamos bien dulcemente, frescamente. Buena gente, buena persona. Con este pensamiento estamos llegando a casa de Hipólito, dulcemente, tranquilamente. Buen caminar, buena palabra, buen sentimiento. Dulcemente, buen tiempo, buen clima. El sol brilla, el río está tranquilo. No hay animal ponzoñoso, no hay parizada, no hay espina, no hay tronco. No hay tormenta, no hay rayo, no hay mal espíritu, no hay mala persona. No puede, se resiste, es espejo. Este espejo devuelve su rayo. Con este pensamiento caminamos, con este pensamiento vinimos, con este pensamiento llegamos. Este pensamiento está buscando traer amistad, traer producción, traer vida. Nuestro pensamiento es ese mismo pensamiento, pensamiento de vida. Queremos saludar al amigo, queremos llevar buena palabra, buen consejo, buen regalo. Para eso estamos nombrando hoy este pensamiento, corazón del Padre, corazón de la Madre, corazón de nuestra vida. está nombrado para nosotros.
Dime Kuno. O sea que se vaya Espinosa Escumare. Neje.
Ahí está Neje que
Esa Escumare, esa detrás allá también es Escumare, pero la parte de abajo ya perdió las espinas. El cansancio.
Vamos a ríen
Bueno, no tanto porque es que también queremos que sea dignificado. Ajá.
Sí, ya como un anciano sacando la felicita a la curación de una criatura para el nombramiento de un joven.
Ya va a terminar yo.
Pero ellos no entienden por dientes.
Un imposteur.
Ouais.
Je suis convaincu.
Il prend dans le cendre de les corps humains qu'il même a brûlés.
De estos pero casi como hoyo.
Estás capturando la solemnidad del momento, ¿no?
Uno de estos todo y de ahí nomás, el más rato de noche uno lo va a esconder. Hasta que ya el doctor de a poquito, así que ya de menos. Pues un blanco nunca andaba así, pues, para él, entonces. Y es todo.
Está quemado.
Pues del patio, porque
No, espérate, es el bote que está así.
del patio usted haga así, porque si no el plato se voltea. Ese amiguito que está de ti,
Sí. Sí.
ya no podemos regar, ya pues. Un trabajo muy a sacar ese muy problemático.
¿Qué tal?
And in this case, well, it was a case of something nasty being transformed into a desirable substance, salt, which will make your tobacco sweet. This tobacco will then generate good thoughts and emotions in you that will allow you to interact effectively and beautifully with your fellows, and to treat them well, and to remember how to be a good person, and so forth. I'm wondering if I skipped something, but I think I'll leave it there, except maybe to tell you guys that one of the questions that has interested me most about writing this paper is this question of how do we deal with belief in ourselves in anthropology. I don't know if you guys have had that. Spirits. Are they symbolic resources we use to interact with each other, or do we treat them as agents in their own right? Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, Carlos, we should thank you, but we should also thank you for allowing yourself to be.
When I wrote this, I didn't know he would be coming. So this is there's a modicum of embarrassment in this, right?
Don't run out. I think I appreciate very much actually your emphasis on doing things, because we've been hearing an awful lot about exchange as a process of material objects as if they were already made, going from one person or one entity, if you like, to another entity. But it seems to me that this ability to do things is one of the things that, at least in my experience, indigenous people appreciate most about people who come from far. Okay, so your ability to make a basket, or maybe not your ability to make a basket, but this idea that material objects have a process of fabrication attached to them, and knowing how to make these things is part of what creates a social relationship in some sense.
Well, otherwise you're full of shit, is their claim. I mean, anybody who knows lots of myths and stuff like that is nobody if they cannot apply them for some practical purpose, right? So what saved me was that I worked. Like I was willing to carry firewood and manioc for the women and to pound coca, right? And it made a huge difference in the personal interaction with them. Because after a while, they started taking proprietary pride in us, right? I remember some Huitotos talking about Juan with our anthropologist. He can do this. He can do that. What can you do? Right? And in my case, I had the same thing as you with stinginess, right? Oh, well, this other guy used to give us so much money, right? You, no. But then afterwards, one of the glorious moments in my field work was this horrible woman who was really hard on me. I mean, really, really hard. At some point, speaking proudly about me as her anthropologist, and, oh, he already eats all our stuff. With pride, right? So my body, they have made me into an eater of their food.